We're just waiting for a few more people to join us. So welcome and thank you for making the time for what's going to be a very interesting morning. As you'll see, we're recording the meeting today as well. Great. Okay. I think, Shireen, we should probably get cracking. It's we've got a very busy morning ahead. So yes, as I say, a very, very warm welcome. It's been a while since we've had a Civic University Network meeting, and it's a real pleasure to be back. And so much has been going on over the last few months. And today, the purpose of our meeting really is just to just look at each other's work really. And we've been very lucky that 3 members of the network have volunteered to tell the story really of work that they're involved in over the course of the next hour and a half. We've got 3 really thought-provoking and practical presentations, I think, about the work that's going on. We're going to start in a minute by going to Derby, and Jenny and Claire are going to talk about a project there, a partnership project, which I think many of you will find incredibly useful, actually, at looking at the relationship between the university and the community and voluntary sector. Then we're going to have a longer case study from Helen and Katrina from the University of Bath, who are going to sort of frame their approach and talk a lot about how they're developing their civic strategy and look at some of the learning that's coming through from that. And then we're going to pop across to the city of Bristol, and Jessica's going to talk to us about a particular project based in a community within the city of Bristol. And then we'll have a few minutes to wrap up. As I said, we're going to record today because we really want to put these resources onto the Civic University Network website. We will be judiciously pausing the recording at a couple of points where the conversation is going to become more frank, and for obvious reasons that can really help. We really look forward to your comments and your questions in chat, and if you've got a question, if you could kind of put it in as a headline, really, this is a question, and then feed your question in. Each of the teams are going to really look forward to the Q&A. But I think without further ado, it would be just really great to get started. Please do introduce yourself in the chat as well. It's lovely to know who's in the room and why you're here. But can I pass over to Claire and to Jenny to get us going and to take us to Derby?
Many thanks for that. Jenny, do you want to kick off?
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much for inviting us to speak to you all today. I hope you enjoy it and find our project as interesting as we're finding it. Community Chesterfield is a partnership project between Derbyshire Voluntary Action and the University of Derby. We're lottery funded for 3 years to do this work. We aim to share the resources to strengthen our local voluntary sector, and we have objectives around cross-sector shared learning, delivering training to voluntary sector groups, creating projects and placements for University of Derby members, and we want to basically foster as much time spent between the 2 sectors as possible. We've had some amazing successes with students taking over Twitter for our voluntary sector organisations for a short period of time, or one of the University of Derby lecturers doing a research project for Relate, our local mental health infrastructure charity. We try and measure things in terms of meaningful connections rather than more static measurements such as volunteering, and we're doing really well with that, with over 30 meaningful connections made between the University of Derby and our voluntary sector organisations. I'm Jenny Rashbauer. I'm the project manager for the Community Chesterfield project, and I lead a team of 4 people who do all sorts of things in terms of networking with our voluntary sector organisations, delivering and organising training and shared learning, organising events, as well as our meaningful connections and brokering relationships. Claire is with me today. She's our counterpart at the University of Derby, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Claire Carter. I'm a senior lecturer and a business relationship manager for the College of Health Psychology and Social Care, but ultimately for the University of Derby. It's been fantastic, the start of this project, initially starting within the college, but we've seen spread over the last couple of years to across the university. So hopefully the next slide will help us to consider what's going to be happening and talk about what the project has brought. If anybody could bring the slides back up. Fabulous, that's great, fabulous. So the first one, we've kind of addressed the project on this main slide for today. And the first one I think both Jenny and I will probably talk to is about that commitment. I think the commitment in terms of that joint collaboration between Derbyshire Voluntary Action and the University of Derby coming together to create Community Chesterfield as a project and an entity in its own right. There were plenty of synergies from the outset of conversations with both our connections in health and social care sector. So that was the starting point. That's how we've made a commitment and have joint collaborative working. Jenny, do pitch in if you do want to add anything. The main focus, however, for this project was specifically on a geographical region of Chesterfield, hence Community Chesterfield. We have a campus at Chesterfield, which houses health and social care programmes, and we had Derbyshire Voluntary Action mainly in the Chesterfield area. And therefore there was a focus that our students are living and breathing, because most of our students live locally and come to us locally. And so our students are also that community that we're engaging with. So our commitment was definitely about that focus of place. And beyond that, there was then a shared vision in which we wanted to capture, and I think Jenny alluded to earlier about harnessing that commitment and that energy and synergies in terms of health and social care, the community and the university, and truly embedding the university in the community. So I think that encapsulates everything that we kind of wanted to get across in terms of commitment. It was truly about collaborative shared vision. So next, it's really about the partnership element. Once we had a commitment to each other and the area, it was about how can we engage in a partnership with one another. So not only was it in terms of organisational partnerships, as we said, the Derbyshire Voluntary Action and the University of Derby coming together to have a partnership. It's also about the relationships with each other and one another, be that with students, be that with the community groups, be that with the community or with our student body as well. And so that's really important and vital to embed this Community Chesterfield project within the programmes, as much as it's about embedding in the community groups as well. So it's kind of been a two-pronged attack in terms of the partnership has got to be inward and also externally. From my point of view at the university, and it'll be the opposite for Jenny, in terms of it's got about taking the voices from the community into the university as well, and working as partners together. But also, go on, Jenny.
This is one of the elements I think that has been the thing we've learned most from and has been most challenging, because the University of Derby, as you're all aware, is an incredible organisation. They've got 6,000 odd staff, they've got a lot of students, they're very focused and very busy on what they do. And in order for the voluntary sector to have a voice that can compete with that, has been a real learning curve, but also has been a fabulous opportunity. And we've really learned that it's about those relationships with individuals within the university. And that's where Claire has been so essential, really, in that we've been able to have some amazing relationships with individuals and have developed projects which fit well with the courses and the work that people are already doing at the university. So we can enhance the work that the university is already doing. And that's been a great way to build the partnership together.
But but also I'd say it works both ways in terms of hearing the community and what they want as well, and having that voice coming through Community Chesterfield into the university, and having that voice with students and having that voice with the academic team is absolutely vital in terms of the project. In terms of its presence, obviously it's changed over the last couple of years. The Community Chesterfield team do have offices on our campus, so connections are able to be made. But obviously in the last year or so, there's been a thing called a pandemic. And so actually much of the work has also been virtual as well. But it's about how you can continue with those relationships and connections whilst being virtual. I guess has been quite challenging for everybody involved. But, you know, hopefully we both see it as a great success. We've got Charlotte on the line today, who has also been covering for almost a year, Jenny, while she's been on maternity leave. So it's also great to have Charlotte here, because she has been truly embedded in the project as well. So I don't know if you want to move on to funding, Jenny. We've not got the slides again.
No, that's fine. We are very lucky in that we've had funding from the National Lottery on this partnership for the last 2.5 to 3 years. We are now currently thinking about funding our next steps, because the relationship building, we've got solid foundations, but we've only really, I think, narrowed down the full potential of what we can do with this project. And looking to the future, we have so many exciting things planned. We have managed to attract additional funding in the past from Joined Up Careers, DanCop, and also we've had driven interns working on the project. And looking to the future, we will be going back to the lottery for a further funding bid, but we also have some other funders up our sleeves to approach. We would like to also work more closely looking at evaluating the work that we do, both in terms of the impact on the student at the university, because I think it has had an amazing impact. I've got in touch recently with a lady who leads one of the modules that work with us very closely. And she says that the students that have used our resources for their project have all scored much higher than the other students on the course who haven't. So that's quite interesting. But we'd like to measure sort of the long-term impact, how they perceive their careers and how they perceive themselves going forwards in relation to their connection with us. We also want to reach out to businesses. So we've created a successful model with the partnership between the university and the third sector, but we would like to engage with businesses in the work streams that we already have, as we see that as being a way to make the model more sustainable going forwards. And we also want to focus on the impact that we've had within the voluntary sector, because we've done a lot of evaluation there, and we know that certainly through the pandemic we've been a bit of a lifeline for many of those organisations, and it's had such a positive impact. And our overriding goal really is to strengthen the local voluntary sector to make it more resilient and fit for the future.
And I think, you know, we can't underestimate it. You've not mentioned this, Jenny, in terms of funding, but as part of that commitment and a part of that partnership, whilst we've had lottery funding, there has been in-kind contributions from both organisations. And I think that, again, really demonstrates the strategic drive for a project from both organisations, that there is that in-kind commitment to the project. So just to quickly move on before we start on Q&As, it's just the final part is around our learning. Jenny, did you want to pop in anything there?
Yep, so as well, this is a slide that shows you a little bit about what we've been doing and the results of the project and some of the meaningful connections that we've made. We've got internships, digital inclusion projects, community corner, mentoring, all sorts of very exciting things, and you can check out our website after this to find out more. In terms of learnings, I mentioned it earlier, having Claire is essential for that signposting and introductions within the university world. but also having senior university buy-in is essential. We've had to, as a team, push quite hard to make things happen and to change the way of working for some of the university lecturers who are very focused on delivering what they've got to deliver, and we're jumping up and down saying, oh, but you can use us and we've got these amazing resources you can participate in. But having that senior lecturer buy-in and that senior level university buy-in means that we can keep pushing our agenda and actually make change happen, which has been really exciting as more and more projects have become involved with the work that we're doing. And we have actually expanded out beyond health and social care, utilising the School of Business and other elements of the university for the work that we do, and that's just fabulous. And as part of that learning, I think having a dedicated team here on the Community Chesterfield project who can have the resources to push and make things happen and to find these opportunities and match make between the voluntary sector organisations that we work with and the projects within the university has been essential. So I don't think we would have achieved nearly as much had we tried to achieve these things without a community project team focused on this and dedicated to these objectives. And lastly, Derbyshire Voluntary Action is in a unique position in that we've got over 300 voluntary sector organisations that we work with and we support, and having the buy-in and the enthusiasm from the voluntary sector as a whole has really been essential in making the project happen. And it means that, you know, we can broker those relationships, we can find placement opportunities for students. We have students coming to us and saying, oh, I'd like to do a project on almost anything. And we then are able to find an organisation that can support their learning, which is really exciting. Whether it's, you know, eating disorders, autism, communication, second languages, drug and alcohol abuse, you know, the possibilities are limitless, and that's really exciting.
And for me, one thing, and just before we do move to the Q&As then, Paul, it's just also that it's vice versa, that actually we're using the community groups to support students' learning in terms of experts by experience. So how can we embed the community groups to assist and enhance real life learning, you know, with those community groups for the hard of hearing, those with sight problems, etc., within the curriculum, that we can work with Community Chesterfield and aligning that community with students' learning as well is so important. So I'm sure Jenny can share lots of outcomes post the event, but if we can go to Q&As, that would be great, Paul.
Great, wonderful, thank you both. And you know what, gosh, what an important project. I suppose what I wondered if you could just clarify is, you know, you've talked about the model. If you had to sort of sum up, what's the model that other universities, you know, might want to adapt? What are the critical elements of the model that you've developed?
For me, it would be about that commitment. It's having that shared vision for both organisations coming together, and whether that was beyond two organisations, it's what synergies do you see that you have, and how it's not just one way, it's got to be two way. And
I suppose, Claire, I was also thinking about, you know, practically what do you do to actually achieve the kind of outcomes that you've clearly achieved? So what's the practical kind of model as well?
What to achieve the outcomes? It's communication, as much as it is about me exploring with the Community Chesterfield team what the community wants right now, as much as it is around knowing colleagues within the college and beyond to go, how can we meet those needs and those requirements, and vice versa. When you know, I am a senior lecturer, I understand the health and social care sector, that's my background, understanding the programmes and the requirements, going, what can we achieve? How can we challenge, exactly what Jenny said, how can we challenge what we currently do to embed this project within? You know, we're very fixed in delivering our programme outcomes, quite rightly, but how can we challenge that to make it even more focused on our community and outcomes?
And, you know, I guess just on the practical side, you know, the money, how much does it cost and what do you need to, you know, what do you spend the money on? I don't know how much you can tell us about actually, you know, what investment did you need to make this work and what did you spend the money on to actually get this to happen?
Well, I think I can probably say on behalf of Jenny, the vast amount has been the Community Chesterfield team, having new staff specifically to drive that project in Community Chesterfield has been the vast amount. In terms of a university, in kind, it's 1 day of my week on this project in kind. So, you know, it's quite a commitment, as well as it is to reduce fees for physical space. As much as it is for our academics to participate free of charge, because we see that engagement with the project in the community is very important. But I don't know if Jenny wants to answer from her side.
Well, as Claire said, I mean, it's essential that we've had the commitment in kind from both the University and Derbyshire Voluntary Action, because we wouldn't be able to do it without them. And the biggest chunk of what we spend money on is staff salaries. You know, I've been looking at the budgets for next year and I'm thinking, well, we could cut that, and we haven't spent that much on stationery, especially as we've been working from home. But it is those staff salary and about the hours and what people actually can achieve with that time commitment.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So we will share, you know, the links to the project, but also so that you can really get to understand, if you wanted to sort of take this model and work with it, it's very, you know, it's very interesting that you've managed to secure funding from the Lottery Community Fund. So that's clearly really, really important. Yeah, it's sort of really, it's really exciting, I think, to think about how other people might take and develop it. I think the other thing I suppose I was thinking about, Jenny, is thinking about Derbyshire Voluntary Action. And, you know, in every city, is there a similar organisation to your own that universities could and should be approaching?
It's not that straightforward. The voluntary sector across the country has really evolved in different ways. It would be a case of finding your local infrastructure organisation. In Chesterfield, there are actually 3 infrastructure organisations that do slightly different roles. So there is a volunteer centre that focuses on primarily volunteering and getting people to volunteer, and has done essential work during the pandemic in terms of that first response. But there is also Links CVS, which supports sort of the governance of organisations. And there's our organisation, which focuses primarily on health and social care organisations. But of course, as many of you know, health and social care is a very, very wide remit and includes nearly everybody and everything that we do, if you take into account well-being and, you know, feeling connected as part of your well-being. So it would be quite a task, I think, to find out your local one geographically, but also the one that would be most forward-looking and able to help with a project of this kind.
Yeah, wonderful.
And what I'd just like to reach out, Paul, is that we do have Erica. I've seen that she's popped something in the chat, one of our academics at Chesterfield, which is lovely to have her here today. Don't know if she wants to put a camera on and give us a wave. But it's been fabulous to have the team, the academics, exploring what we can do. With our students and within the programmes. She's currently off. But it's been fantastic to have her on board as well. So yeah, it's really important to have that engagement.
Yeah, thank you. And please, in the chat, I mean, Helen, you put a question in a bit earlier about what seems to be at the heart of this project is about connections and connectors who can join people up. But Helen, you asked a question a few minutes ago, which was, what defines a meaningful connection? That's a good question and a tricky one, but maybe we could sort of end there. But everyone else, please use the chat. If there are things about what's going on in Derby that you'd love to find out more about, we can make sure that in the write-up of this event, we get you links, we get you descriptions of anything that you're thinking, oh, I'd love to know more about X or Y. So please use the chat to pop any practical questions that you've got that you'd like us to follow up with after the event. And then maybe we could just take Helen's final question about the meaningful connection, which seems to be right at the heart of everything you've talked about. Any thoughts about that, Claire or Jenny?
Yes, it depends very much on what the opportunity is. So a meaningful connection could be a lecturer or a university member writing a research paper in collaboration with one of our groups, or it could be students giving a little bit of time to do a project with one of the groups. It could be an internship doing a project with some of our groups. It could be one of our groups coming in and delivering a session for students. So it basically covers absolutely everything that doesn't fit our other targets. So we've delivered in our second year 970 individual training hours, accessed by individuals for over 100 organisations, and many of those training hours have been delivered by University of Derby staff. We've done 12 cross-sector shared learning workshops, which have been attended by 183 participants. We've had 6 voluntary and community sector groups offering placement opportunities for students, 10 students placed at 3 different settings. So those are our brief targets, and then the meaningful connections one is everything that doesn't fit within one of the others. And we are currently working on developing an evaluation tool that will be able to evaluate the impact of those meaningful connections and explain them and explore them more fully.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I think we can probably say goodbye. Paul, oh, you're back. That's fine. You froze for a moment then. So thank you very much. And if anybody wants to send us any questions or get in touch, our emails were on that last slide. So please do feel to get in touch anytime. And as I say, we'll share some of the resources as well for everybody today.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful. If you were in a room, there'd be a round of applause, and I'm sure our colleagues will find a way to say thank you in the chat. But yeah, wonderful. What a great start, and what a great sort of practical example of how to get partnership to work. Helen and Katrina, we're going to come to you now. We're going to move to the City of Bath, to the University of Bath, and you're going to, I think, give us a slightly longer, more expansive account of how you are getting on with your civic work. So I can't wait to hear more. So over to you.
Thanks, Paul. No pressure on on that then. So thank you very much for inviting us to share our what we've been doing around our Civic University Agreement. This is who we are. I'm Helen Featherstone. I'm the Head of Public Engagement at the University of Bath, and I'm here with my colleague Katrina. Katrina, did you want to just introduce yourself too?
Yeah, so my name's Katrina Kelly and I'm Head of Community Engagement for the University of Bath, so work very closely with Helen.
Yeah. So quite interesting that we've got these 2 roles, and you may be interested in what those 2 roles mean and why we've got the titles that we have. Just to reiterate what Claire said as well, we are happy to share things. So if there's anything that we say that you want to dig into in a bit more detail, do ask questions in the chat or follow up with us afterwards. So we'd be absolutely delighted to go into more detail. What we're going to do is, as Paul said, we've got a wee bit longer. So we're going to cover what we've been doing around the Civic University Agreement as a piece of change work, and I'll start with that. And then Katrina's going to give us some detail on a specific project called Our Shared Future. And then depending on how the time goes and how many questions there are, I can also talk a little bit about one example of how we're thinking about our civic behaviours. So that's our plan for the next wee while. Please, as I said, do ask questions, do put things in the chat, and I'll be delighted to see, and myself and Katrina will be delighted to see what we can do. So I shall kick off then with a little bit about what we're doing around our Civic University Agreement. It might be worth just telling you a little bit about Bath before we get going, because I think sometimes it's useful to know a little bit about context, doesn't it? So, so the University of Bath is a mid-sized research-intensive university. We're in the southwest of England, and we're a campus university on the top of a hill in the World Heritage City of Bath. We are invisible to the city. If you come to Bath as a tourist, you would not know that there was not only one university but 2 universities within the city, which is quite interesting. So we've got another university as well, Bath Spa University, and we've been working really closely with them in terms of our Civic University Agreement work, and we have quite complementary research strengths. So we're largely sort of STEM, humanities, social sciences and management, while Bath Spa is more sort of arts and culture focused. And just to give you a sense of sort of scale, the City of Bath has about 100,000 residents, and the overall student population, we've got about 18.5, and Bath Spa has 8.5. So we're quite a significant proportion of the resident population. So that gives you a little bit of outline of what the University of Bath is. Where we were when we first got going on our Civic University Agreement, perhaps I could just have the slide up just for a moment, Shireen. So this is nothing new, right, to any of us. What the key message from this slide is that this stuff takes time. We first started talking about a Civic University Agreement in the January of 2019. So we're now nearly, where are we, 3 years on from that, come January next year. So that's quite interesting. And the reason I think it's interesting, and we could take the slide down now if you like, Shireen, thank you, is that we've had a really fair wind. You know, so where the University of Bath was when we first started talking about this was that we were having a change of Vice Chancellor. So we were going from a Vice Chancellor who was less interested in the local and the civic to a new Vice Chancellor who was absolutely foregrounding that as a commitment. So that meant that our relationships between town and gown were perhaps not quite as positive as they could have been. We knew that there was staff and student desire to do more work locally and civically. And also we had a point where we also had my team, the public engagement unit. We'd been doing some change work around public engagement with research since 2012. So we had a really clear definition of what we meant by public engagement with research, and we could go on a kind of a working definition of what the distinction was between the civic work, which we see as an institutional endeavour, versus public engagement with research, which is a research endeavour and is delivered by our academic colleagues. So we had that sort of, yeah, like I say, a fair wind, you know, underneath our wings as we got going. And we also had the internal resource of myself and my team and Katrina. Now that has 3 full-time equivalent people, but we also, as well as creating the Civic University Agreement project and structure, we also have to deliver our ordinary core business as well. So it's not been a huge resource, but we've basically have reallocated resources internally to make this stuff happen. So in terms of what we've done, perhaps we could have the slide up and I can just talk to that for a moment. So, like I say, this sort of work kicked off in, oh, Nancy, yeah, I think we'll be sharing the slides afterwards. So, Shireen, is the slide there again? So I think what's interesting, or what I found interesting reflecting back on this, was that we first suggested that we have a Civic University Agreement before the new VC, Professor Ian White, before he even started, which was interesting because he came in with this strong commitment to social, and he'd seen Queen's University Belfast social charter and wanted to have one of those, and we sort of, knowing the relationship between the town and gown, we were a bit like, we can't really do that. And actually what would be better is if we do some really significant change work to really understand what civic work means for the University of Bath and for the region and for the partners, and actually let's do this in a meaningful way and let's produce something that's forward facing and based on evidence. So that was the case we made, and that was good. So that was accepted. So we've had quite a long process of sort of feeding in the idea of the CUA into the broader strategy and the local engagement strategy. So it's mine and Katrina's line manager who's responsible for the local engagement strategy and the civic work. Conducted a brief listening exercise. We did not have the resource to do a big region-wide consultation. There was no budget for that. So I basically phoned up some key stakeholders in the region and asked them what they thought about the university and what we should be doing and what their priorities were, so that we could see how we could fit into those. And what we found out there was that there'll be no surprises here. Now, bear in mind, this is pre-COVID. that there were people were concerned about the inclusive growth and economic development of the region. There's a lot of disparity within our region. Thinking about skills development and access to higher level qualifications, innovation and entrepreneurship, and how we can kind of deal with these sort of hidden disadvantages that are across the region. And the other thing that was interesting was that people expected us as an anchor institution to behave as a good citizen. You know, so it was very clear that they wanted us to be a model organisation, as it were. And the other thing that was really loud and clear from that was that the people were delighted that we were reaching out, and they saw it very much as a clean slate opportunity. The change of the Vice Chancellor was, there were no hard feelings amongst the sort of potential partners across the region. This is the thing, this is quite an iterative process. Okay, so we then said we were going to create a Civic University Agreement. We made a public commitment to that at a launch event of our shared future. And Katrina's going to talk about that in a bit more detail. We then went into a sort of bit more like, actually, what is this project going to look like? Now, we'd had a change project, as I say, when we set up with the public engagement unit. So we took some of the learning from that and pulled that into what we were going to do with this work. We thought it would be a bit quicker, a bit more light touch. So we took the core ideas from what we'd done before, saying, right, we need a central team that hold it. And we put an advisory group around them. And that advisory group covered all types of job families across the university. So we had academic colleagues as well as our sort of professional services colleagues. And the reason we wanted that was because we knew full well that actually if you want to create systemic change within an institution, you've got to change the way that the university does things. So we had HR, we've got HR on the advisory group, we've, you know, talking to procurement, we, you know, all these different parts of the university, estates and facilities, the sports training village, you know, these bits of the university that have also can take the idea of Civic and put it into their own practice. So we went through a bit of a process of defining that structure with the University Executive Board, and the project formally kicked off in the summer of 2020 with the first advisory group meeting happening in September 2020. And we've since had 4 advisory group meetings. We've got our next one in next month, and that'll be the last one. Unsurprisingly, like the pandemic kind of happened, you know, and that unsurprisingly took the local authority and the local hospital, who were going to be our 2 key partners alongside the 2 universities, their priorities had to turn elsewhere. But so in a sense, COVID both helped and hindered. It helped in the sense that all of the core partners worked together really rapidly, really effectively. And so it demonstrated through a living, breathing process that we could work together on why that was so important. But it also meant that they had other priorities in terms of co-working on a Civic University Agreement. So we decided to continue the internal work because we knew that we needed to change. And so we continued with the change stuff internally. And we're now at the point now where our partners, RUH Hospital and the local authority, are kind of available to breathe again. And they've come, and we're now at the point of actually beginning to draft and write the Civic University Agreement. And just to sort of wrap up really in terms of what our advisory group has done, they've been really helpful. They helped us do a self-assessment. So we started off with the first thing using the EDGE tool, which some of you will be familiar with, which we'd used previously. And that told us that the reward and recognition was really, really needed a lot of work. So we could do some work on that quite quickly. The advisory group helped us think through who our partners should be and how we should incorporate them and the types of relationships we might have with them. We were able to do things like put a new category into our Vice Chancellor's Engage Awards for civic work. We explored what some of the themes might be for the work and how I might present them. We discussed the role of faith groups within this work, and we'd sort of mapped opportunities and looked at some specific interventions as well. One in particular, Civic Duty Days, which I'll come back to later on if we have time. So I think perhaps the other thing that's just worth reflecting on is that Bath is a small city, a small region, and so the same senior staff kind of appear in each other's boards and groups and presentations, and there's a lot of like ongoing relationship. So while COVID was happening and there was all that focus on other things, actually everyone kept seeing each other, and so there was a lot of informal kind of talk about the CUA, about the Civic University Agreement. So it didn't kind of drop off a cliff, but it was just kept going. The conversations were able to be going. So when we actually got to a point where we could get around, obviously, still a virtual room with those senior leaders to say, here's what we're going to put in our Civic University Agreement, it was fine. That we didn't have to kind of pick up pieces, as it were. So I think, yeah, reflections are your starting conditions matter, but even a fair wind underneath your wings it's still going to take time, and like I think we heard with Claire and Jenny's project, it's people, and you've got to have that resource available to do this sort of work. So I'll stop there.
Wonderful. We'll, Katrina, come to you in a second. Just Helen, there's a question from Claire about who did you engage with for feedback?
Yeah, and because we were focusing. So are you thinking about the listening exercise, Claire?
Yeah, I'm just intrigued because both Charlotte and I are part of our Civic University agreement committee, and much of the talk is around engagement with the community, but it seems to be quite a business orientated model, reaching out to organisations, businesses. So that, and when you were talking about feedback was around economic growth and qualifications, it just that they're very much business kind of speak.
No, that wasn't, that's actually not really how it's been here, sorry, and I apologise if I gave that as an impression.
No, it's just really for learning purposes.
It's a brilliant question. No, so because we already have a kind of business engagement part of the university that's already doing this sort of work, we didn't need to step into that. The desire for the skills development actually came through people like the colleges, the local colleges, voluntary services, the community development organisations that we worked with, because they quite rightly recognise that low aspiration and lack of education is something that hinders inclusive growth, which was absolutely a priority even before the pandemic happened. I'll need to go back and look at the exact people that I spoke with, but it was very kind of across the board, lots of different types of organisation, and actually the conversations with the advisory group, we've sort of flip-flopped a little bit with the business thing, because we've decided that actually the anchor organisations should be the anchor, the not-for-profits, but we recognise that there are big businesses within the region that play an important part. So how we've ended up sort of tentatively at the minute saying we have the core partners, Bath Spa University, University of Bath, RUH local authority, Baines, possibly, and then heading out perhaps towards a big charity called the St John's Foundation and the college, and the third sector groups, which you'll recognise the umbrella sort of voluntary and community services, and we'll keep them as the core partners, probably, and then other organisations who want to follow suit or want to kind of be supporters can be supporters, and that would be where some of those big businesses might come in. So we'll kind of that's the tentative, but we haven't got there yet, so that's our kind of working hypothesis. There's quite a lot of working hypothesis within our work.
But I think we're the same, but that's really that's just really interesting to have that confirmed, so thank you.
Thanks, Claire.
Great. Okay, well, let's go to Katrina now, who's going to talk about the Our Shared Future project that's nested within that overall picture. And please do keep using the chat. There's some great comments and questions coming through, so please keep that buzzing. And Katrina, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, so I'm going to give a bit of a sort of elevator pitch of what the Our Shared Future project is, and then we'll have a look at some of the challenges of getting it off the ground and the way it was structured. So as Helen said, we had a clean slate opportunity. This is back in December 2019, January 2020. We had a new Vice Chancellor. The local authority had a new head as well. And so where there had previously not been an extremely strong relationship, or really any relationship, there was a new desire to have one. So Our Shared Future is essentially the University of Bath's approach to how we work with our immediate local authority, which is Bath and North East Somerset Council. It essentially was started in, or launched, preconceived, but launched in January 2020. And from the outset, it focused on a number of core themes. So the first activity through our Shared Future was a workshops of conference day, which brought together academics and people from the local council who were interested in particular subject areas. So a couple of themes were chosen so decarbonisation of the built environment, because 60%, I think 65% of the carbon in the Baines area comes from buildings. Transport and travel, which is a significant issue in what is a World Heritage City, with very small roads originally built for horse and cart. Development of the infrastructure of the city, and development of a cohesive and an inclusive city. So a link there to sort of online engagement of the local population. So through those workshops, a number of projects were identified that could happen, collaborative research projects between researchers at the university and local authority. But within weeks of that happening, we obviously had the onset of COVID-19, and the priorities of both organisations for a period of time were pulled in quite different directions. I struggle to really say whether COVID delayed our shared future or enhanced it. I feel like the fact that we had that initial conversation and we'd brought key parties together made a huge difference to how we worked together throughout the pandemic, and our ability to work on a collaborative COVID response. So our students are a significant population in the local area. Understandably, residents had considerable worries about students coming in after the Christmas break from all over the world at a time when there was no testing and very little sort of clear idea about what restrictions actually needed to be in place and what the pandemic was going to look like. So us being able to work with the council, with public health, to contain and manage that situation, to support the students, to support local residents. In part, I feel that really cemented our relationship where it had previously been fairly weak, but it did take our focus away from those themes that we had identified for probably a period of about 6 months, while we dealt with the more pressing issues that were related to the pandemic. So the university took on things like making face shields and PPE for the local hospital with support from Baines local authority, and projects like that, which were more pressing in terms of their time. And then come sort of September 2020, we were able to sort of readdress and go back to those themes. And at that point, we realized that there was maybe some need for change. So within them, we decided the decarbonisation for the built environment was absolutely still key. The local authority has made a commitment to be carbon neutral by 2030. The university's made similar commitments. And it is one of the biggest carbon issues in our local area. Transport and travel, again, because of that environmental aspect, was absolutely key. But the infrastructure and the cohesive and inclusive city elements were changed slightly to focus more broadly on health and well-being and access and enjoyment of and enhancement of green spaces across the local authority. So within those areas, we started 4 projects, which were aimed to they were collaborative research projects. They brought researchers together with people in the council to use pre-existing data in some cases, to collect new data in other cases, to try and tackle some of those challenges. So we had a team focused on decarbonising buildings. So they essentially undertook a project to set up a decarbonisation task force. They had a student team to create a vertically integrated project, which is multiple stages of students involved in carrying out research, and they're now seeking funding to build a larger project which will focus on decarbonising heritage sites right around the world. In the transport and travel theme, we had a student-led project which looked at introducing e-scooters to the city and is now looking at other transport-related issues. Under health and wellbeing, we've had an ongoing project looking at evaluating the Bath and North East Somerset Compassionate Communities Hub, and is now looking wider at social prescribing. And under the green spaces element, we kicked off a project looking at the equity of access to green space across the city among different social groups, and the challenges that are in place for some groups to reach and use green space for health and leisure and well-being. That then allowed, we put a structure in place to manage those projects, and through them we identified some of the challenges that existed in the two organisations working together. The main challenges were the sharing of data between the two organisations. Both organisations had differences in their data sharing agreements and in ethics policies. So that led to a programme of work between both organisations to streamline and align our data sharing and our ethics policies. And actually we extended that to include the local hospital, the RUH as well, because that allows the three large organisations in the city to work together with fewer barriers going forward. Another area that was identified as a challenge was getting funding. So to get these projects off the ground, we managed to get some QR funding, a bit of funding from the local LEP. We've recently got some national lottery heritage funding. And we're starting to find that the funding is the biggest challenge to getting these projects off the ground. So that led to us identifying different ways in which our staff at the university could work with staff at the local authority at different levels, so that everybody was really clear about what was available to them when they started a relationship. So obviously funded research where there's external funding to carry out a project. Acting as a critical friend, so academic staff from the university, in most cases, sometimes professional services as well, giving a small amount of time pro bono to support projects that the council are doing, and vice versa, essentially giving input and advice and a sort of second pair of eyes. Student projects, so I mentioned our vertically integrated projects. There's projects that can last for a long period of time. Students can dip in and out of as part of their studies, either as a final year project or as a placement year, or just for interest. And so we've got a number of those going across different areas of work with the local authority now. But we're also now exploring things like student placement years and the like. And then finally is consultancy. So in a number of cases, especially in the COVID response, academics from the University of Bath acted in a consultancy capacity for the local authority, and us being able to coordinate that centrally and make connections for the local authority with relevant academics meant that that was something that was able to happen in a far more streamlined way than it had previously. In terms of the outcomes of the project, I would say overall, the main outcome is that there is now a regular open channel of dialogue between both organisations where there wasn't previously. The university is being actively approached by the local authority for its input on projects. So, for example, the local authority recently developed a shared vision for the city, and the university's input on that was absolutely key and very central to what was finally developed. The local authority has also set up an economic recovery board for post-COVID recovery, which the university has been asked to be part of the steering group for, and is again very central to the shaping of and the driving of. And I would say, in terms of risks, some of the things that we sort of had to think about from the outset and try to mitigate for were challenges of, it's a two university city, Bath. So us working collaboratively with the local authority couldn't be at the exclusion of Bath Spa University. Two universities are very different. They work with very different parts of the local community, so we have very different disciplines that we have expertise in. So making sure that we don't neglect to bring Bath Spa in where it is appropriate to do so on projects that we're working on. Making sure that we don't lose sight of the bigger picture whilst dealing with short-term issues. I say short-term issues, COVID hasn't turned out to be that short term, but shorter term than, say, maybe climate change and some of the bigger challenges, social welfare, that the city faces. So trying to keep that longer term picture at the time when a local authority is very focused on the day-to-day and the immediate pressures on them. I just wondered, Shireen, if we just move on a little bit to talk a bit more frankly about how the project started, if you could.
Of what's happening in Bath. I apologize. I have a very volatile relationship with Zoom, and it throws me out periodically and then lets me back in, and then it destroys the chat. So I've lost a lot of the chats, sadly, but it's clear that people are really engaged and they can't wait, I'm sure, to see some of this background material. And Katrina, you prepared a really useful briefing that we can share with everyone afterwards. But please, again, use chat if you've got particular things you'd like a bit more background detail about, which we can put into the sort of write-up of the event. I think the issue around funding is so interesting, isn't it? That's something certainly for the Civic Network is going to be a focus for us over the next few months, is actually how do you get the money in to pay for this work, and what is it you are paying for? And I found that really interesting in what you were just describing, that you've come up almost with a kind of set of formats for civic work, you know, whether that's what you've called the critical friend or the consultancy or but you know, it's work, it takes time, and you've kind of given that some clarity. And Helen, anything to say about that?
Yeah, perhaps I could just chip in. I'm conscious of time, so I won't go on for ages about this. But the other thing that we have been looking at is our civic duty days. Now, if I don't know if everyone's aware of these, but these are government requirement for organisations to let their staff do civic duties, and there's a list that's defined. I can pop the link in the chat. And we as an institution have long supported that, and most of us knew nothing about this when our HR contact said to us, why don't we use civic duty days to allow staff to do civic work? This was an absolute revelation to us. And it turns out the university had committed 10 days of paid leave to do civic duties. And we were like, this is amazing, but it's quite a tightly defined list. However, the university does have just this little sentence at the bottom that said, and other things to be agreed with your line manager. So we have been exploring about how to expand that to be much more purposeful, and that also will allow not just academics to be involved, but professional services staff as well. However, there's a whole narrative associated with that, which I don't think we've got time for today, but perhaps I could, if anyone's interested in that, I'm happy to share some thoughts around that in the future, or to come back and give a more detailed sort of presentation around that. But it's worth just knowing, yeah, that, and we knew that from our public engagement with research work, is that public engagement with research is done by our academic colleagues, and it's in the service of the kind of research, whereas the civic work is our institutional commitment, and that means the institution has to commit time and resource. But the senior management did panic a little bit, because they suddenly went, 3,000 staff all taking 10 days unpaid leave, that's going to affect the university business. And so we did have to kind of slow that down a little bit. We were hoping for a really easy win, and it's not been quite as easy as we were hoping for, but yeah.
And again, I think the timing of that as well, the fact that, you know, we've just been through COVID, financial output is not necessarily as clear as it maybe normally would, forecasting isn't as clear, so I think that has an impact as well.
Helen, just before we go, you tantalized us at the beginning by saying you might talk about civic behaviours, and we haven't got time to go into that in any detail, but I found that a really interesting notion. I wondered if you could just give us an elevator pitch about civic behaviours and how you're using that.
Thank you, Paul. Yes. So basically, when we're talking about civic behaviours, we're thinking about things like what we do with recruitment, what we do with procurement, how we use our estates and facilities, and think about our transport and travel. It's those types of things. So we've got these big, you know, like, and if how we work can make significant change in the region, and if all of the anchor institutions also put in similar policies in place, for example, to prioritise recruiting, you know, bringing in people who are at risk of long-term unemployment for work placements, for example, you know, that's a HR initiative that has started as a result of the Civic University Agreement work. We've got a change in procurement policy now that incorporates a commitment to local, but that complements an existing, that just happened to be that the procurement policy was changing and that we were able to get that in. So that's the type of thing that we're talking about when we talk about civic behaviour. So it's not about the kind of, what we've heard so far is about the kind of staff mobilisation to do stuff. It's about what we as an institution do. And I would put things like the Civic Duty Days as part of that institutional behaviour that it allocates and gives staff X days a year to do some stuff. So that's what I meant by that.
Yeah, and I'll pop a link in the chat in a minute, but a little while ago we launched on the network site what we called a civic recipe book, which looked at about how lots of different universities were approaching their civic work, and we came up with a sort of categorization which was civic behaviors on the one hand, which is that kind of underpinning processes about how you be as a good civic institution, and then civic knowledge building, which was where people were really integrating the civic into the kind of teaching and the research. So that people might find that quite helpful.
And we used that to inform those discussions, and that sort of, so that was definitely part of our thinking, Paul. So that was really helpful. So
great, it's wonderful. Isn't it wonderful to see this work just maturing and crystallizing and just becoming practical? I just think that was the glory of both the presentations, and our final presentation again is really, I think, about practical work to get civic activity to really come alive. And we're so delighted that Jessica can join us from Bristol. And I think it's fair to say, Jessica, you're going to take a very kind of place focus on a particular area in the city of Bristol, and you're going to give us some insights into how you've worked in that place. So thank you, Helen. Thank you, Katrina. And Jessica, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. You're absolutely right. I was going to start by sort of talking about this project as a reflection on the importance of not only local issues to civic work, but kind of hyper-local issues, if you like. So if I could have the first slide. For those of you who don't know Bristol, just as a very quick bit of context, Bristol Clifton campus at the moment is that star on the furthest left of the screen. Clifton's a very affluent kind of leafy green area, amongst the least 10% deprived in the country, but on any indices of kind of multiple deprivation. We're about to build Temple Quarter Enterprise Campus, which is that blue star to the centre at the bottom of the screen, which for us represents an opportunity to work with communities in the east and the south of the city that historically perhaps Bristol hasn't done quite such a good job of engaging and working with. And that star on the furthest right on the screen is over the project we're going to be talking about today, the Barton Hill Micro Campus, which is situated in Lawrence Hill. And to give you a very quick overview of Lawrence Hill, it does experience very high amounts of deprivation. By contrast, it's in the 10% most deprived communities in the country on the indices of multiple deprivation, and has more children living in low-income families and poverty than anywhere else in the city. But it's also a culturally rich and diverse area. In the census 10 years ago, nearly 60% of Barton Hill came from ethnic minority backgrounds, compared to a city average of 16, and that's risen a great deal since then as well. So there's a wealth of language and cultures, but it experiences its fair share of challenges too. So whilst it's about 2 miles between our current campus and this micro campus project, in terms of context, it's a wholly different context for the university to be working in. Can I have the next slide, please? And I won't dwell on this, but while we're talking about partnerships, I just wanted to flag that the organisation we're working with, Wellspring Settlement, have really, really deep roots with the university. They're a completely independent community organisation, but were originally founded back in 1911 by 3 university academics as part of the wider university settlement movement. The language of which I've read quite a lot of is kind of steeped in Victorian philanthropy, but the intent of it, when you read it, is actually very similar to a lot of the things we talk about now, about how the quality of education and research is improved when you bring in people from all walks of life, and so on and so forth. So we had Bristol Uni students and staff living, working, delivering social work, open air schools for children with tuberculosis. The picture there is a carpentry workshop from the 20s of our undergraduates working with local young people. So like I say, a thriving independent community organisation, but one that's had a very, very long link with the university. So if I go to the next slide, please. So sort of to jump right forward to the present day, when we were thinking about how we work with those communities in the east and the south of the city, one thing that was very important to us, which I'm sure everyone on this call will agree with, was that we worked with the community and did things in collaboration with those different communities in Barton Hill and not to them. So when Wellspring Settlement invited us in, we kind of jumped at the opportunity and have become tenants in their new development, which is what this picture is of here. It's a series of shipping containers, and we're one of 3 tenants in their new buildings, which sit just at the end of their main kind of community buildings. We've done this for a couple of reasons, partly because, as I said, we were thinking about how we work better with the communities in the east and the south of the city, but also because when we've worked with Wellspring Settlement before on engagement projects, we've had lots of conversations that will be familiar to people on this call about how it's brilliant whilst there's funding, and it's brilliant while these projects are going on, and then it disappears when the funding dries up. And we were looking for a more permanent way of working with an organisation that kind of represented, permanent university presence and a different way of working together. Well, we call it a micro campus, not because it's particularly big. Our shipping containers are those 3 on the end. It's 1 room and an office, effectively. We call it a micro campus because the activity there reflects the whole breadth of university engagement activity. And if I have the next slide, I'm going to give you a few examples of the type of engagement projects that the space has facilitated. So students use it. We've got law clinic students offering advice from there. And we've got Q-Step internships running out of there for anyone who's encountered those schemes before. And it hosts engaged research. So on the left is a slide picture from a history of the Single Parent Action Network. That's our academic and a community researcher in conversation there. It also hosts widening participation activities. So on the right is a picture of Digimakers, which is an engineering outreach project. But we're also thinking more widely about what engagement means and what it means to be civic. So as was mentioned in the last presentation, our HR team are using the space to think about how we diversify our staff recruitment and how we make our staff body more representative of the city in which we're situated. There's social opportunities there. Our international office are planning a language cafe. Our international students and lots of community members in Barton Hill have identified English language as a skill they'd really like to develop. So we're working to create a language cafe there that kind of works for students and community. Our botanic gardens were involved in setting up a community fruit and veg garden, which is now looked after by volunteers at the settlement. And importantly, we have a day a week set aside for hot desking to help our staff build those partnerships in East Bristol, meet organisations and kind of plan for the future too. So if I could have the next slide. Thank you. I think one of the really interesting things about the way we've approached this, though, has been becoming a sort of part of an ecosystem of other organisations. So Wellspring Settlement are our landlords, if you like, and the host and the kind of main organisation at the settlement. They run activity in 4 areas themselves across economic inclusion, community inclusion, family and health and well-being. But they've also got a host of other tenants, some of whom are featured on this slide. It includes mental health charities, refugee charities, a homelessness charity, Bristol Somali Resource Centre. And to give you an example of the ways of being part of this kind of rich network has helped both university and hopefully the other tenants too. I've recently been involved in setting up a project with Bristol Refugee Rights, where our students are in there calculating the social value of the organisation to support them when it comes to bid writing. So they've got a kind of a numerical figure to put on their social value, which helps them hopefully then attract further funding into their organisation. So for the students, you've got the experience of kind of research and consultancy, and for Bristol Refugee Rights, hopefully a real helpful outcome as well. So if I could have the next slide, thank you. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's a host, and it's a host of activity and a hub and a space I'm responsible for curating. In terms of the practicalities, we were quite lucky, I guess, in funding this, in that one of the main principles of the new Temple Porter campus is around engagement and around working with the city. So I was able to take a business case through the various university committees and get the first 5 years of this secured through that new campus development funding. That covers the rent, a very, very small events budget, and my time in running it, if you like. In terms of funding the specific activity, this is a really federated model. And so whilst my job is kind of in part cheerleader and promoting this internally amongst the university community, they then run their own projects from there. So I don't have any budget or funding that affects the law centre or the internships or anything else I've mentioned. That's all funded by the different constituent parts of the university. That said, we do have a Temple Quarter Engagement Fund, which we've also been able to set up, which has small pots of money in the region of 3,000 to 5,000 that funds engagement projects that staff and students can both apply for. So lots of the projects that have gone into the space have had some money through that as well. That was initially also funded through the campus sort of build budget, but we've now managed to have that sort of funded by alumni. So we've got sort of philanthropy involved in making sure that's an ongoing thing. In terms of challenges, there's been a few. We opened in COVID-19. That's probably all I want to say about that, really, except to say that the first year certainly wasn't as busy as I'd hoped, but this term is looking really good. The maybe more interesting challenge for this group will be the cultures rather of two vastly different organisations, and bringing those together, the formality of those organisations, the size of them, the way they worked. To give you one small example, in being involved in the actual build project, Wellspring Settlement had one project manager who was a force of nature making everything happen. From my perspective, I was involved in getting network access in there, UCard access in there, furniture, decoration, and there were probably 50 different people from the university who wanted some kind of input at some point or other. And I became very much an umbrella and a kind of trying to protect that relationship. And linked to that, because it's a kind of a bricks and mortar project and we're in a tenant and landlord relationship, I wear two very different hats in my relationship with Wellspring Settlement. I have one where I'm trying to sort of, particularly as the build was going on, make sure everything's going to time, that the contracts are being signed, that there's no issues. And then I have a very different hat where I'm involved in trying to create these collaborative projects, which are all planned with the settlement. And it's a very different type of relationship. So you've got the same people at both organisations wearing two very different types of hats, which has had its challenges at times. And sort of also linked to that, I think if I were to do this again, one thing, or what we'd like to do in future, is think about how we create more capacity in the sort of host organisation themselves to help with those projects. I've got umpteen staff and students really keen to work with them and to book stuff in and to plan stuff, you know, as we will probably talk about regularly, properly, collaboratively, and have it sort of co-produced from the start. That of course has its own staff time implications, and the settlement, I think sometimes we can be quite full on with them in terms of how much we want from them, how much we want to do. And so finding the money to fund a post that actually sits inside the settlement would be an aim for the future. Finally, I'll just say on structure, it's completely federated. I'm the only person who has responsibility for the kind of space itself, if you like. I sit in business and civic engagement for the university. But like I say, the activity there is drawn from right across the union, right across the spectrum, which is both its strength and sometimes its challenge. In that it's sort of encouraging others to embed it into their core work, see it as part of their key engagement activity, and believe that it's really a shared space, because I think that's a fairly difficult idea for some corners of the university as well. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's been a really interesting project to be kind of getting off the ground in fairly strange times. But yeah, I've tried to leave enough time for questions. If anybody has any, I'd be very happy to take them.
That's wonderful, Jessica. Absolutely fascinating. Please do use the chat if you've got questions for Jessica. And also please use the chat in the last few minutes as we wrap up to just feedback, you know, any reflections on what you've heard today. You know, what's most sort of struck you? What's your key takeaway? It would be fascinating to just understand what you've heard, what's really grabbed your interest. So please do just use the chat to share a few reflections on what you've heard, or to offer any specific questions. I wanted to leap in, Jessica, with a couple of questions myself, and you may not want to answer the first one, but how much did it cost? You talked about a 5-year business plan. I don't know how much you can share, but roughly, what are we talking about to get something like this up and running?
Yeah, no problem at all. So I suppose the first thing I should emphasise is that because the Wellspring settlement led on the build project, the kind of risk from our end was lower, and that was largely funded by a Power to Change grant, and quite a big one. Our costs per annum are including all the rent and so on, are in the region of 20 to 30,000.
Right, great, okay. And looking, we've already heard two funders talked about today. In the first presentation, the Lottery Community Fund, and Power to Change is really interesting, with a real focus on sort of building community businesses. So I think there's a real strand here to look at a bit more, which is how can we bring funding together to kind of give this work the kind of investment it needs. Yeah, I wondered also just about, you know, we live in this sort of digital virtual space, very much sort of led by the pandemic, and lots of enthusiasm about all the wonderful digital things you can do, but your bricks and mortar, you've said that quite clearly. How important is it to be bricks and mortar and to be physically located?
For us, particularly in Barton Hill, it was really important because in part just because of the huge amounts of digital exclusion experienced. So, you know, this was obviously conceived of pre-pandemic, this idea, and it's one we've had to think about a lot as the pandemic has wore on. We've taken some things online, so the HR workshops I mentioned, there's been some work where they've been recruiting for quite senior roles and aspects like that we've decided it's really fine and appropriate to adapt to kind of online delivery. There's other elements we did actually just completely pause because we thought a lot of the people we thought it was most important to reach just wouldn't be able to engage. And we worked quite carefully with the settlement to decide which was more appropriate in which setting. And you know, the other thing is having the physical space. It's uni networked. One thing we can do is try and kind of bring that resource to bear to support other projects as well. So there's, you know, after school clubs planned for the space where, you know, students who aren't online at home can come and access it that way. So there's that kind of blending between the physical and the digital, if you like. But I think particularly in that context, we thought that yeah, keeping the physical location was really, really important.
Yeah. Anyone like to put their hands up, make any sort of comments or questions for Jessica? I don't know, Helen, Katrina, whether you can see any immediate sort of links back, and Claire and Jenny, whether, if you're still here, whether you see any connections. But just, we've got 5 minutes really just to pull things together before we close. Anybody like to just pitch in?
I think what I can see is what people have been putting in the chat, which is how important people are for this. So this isn't about funding projects, it's about funding people to keep those relationships going. And I think what we haven't done at the university yet is, we obviously, Katrina's resourced through core funding, but we are expecting to put in a business case associated with our Civic University agreement, and that's been part of that dialogue with UEB. Every time we've been talking about it, it's been, we're going to write a Civic University agreement, and then we're going to put in a business case as well. So whether it comes to anything or not, I don't know, but we are anticipating that having gone through this project process, that we'll be able to have a better understanding of what the need is, and what those types of people are, and just picking up really that point that it's got to be, there's got, you know, the external relationship as well. So it's not just enough to have a person in the university, there's got to be a person outside as well to have those relationships with. So yeah, that's my reflection for what it's worth. Yeah.
Anyone else like to add anything?
I totally agree with that. It's all about the people, and as Helen said, it's in the chat. I think it's about that communication and reaching out, isn't it, to people.
Yeah, it did strike me listening to you, tiny teams working in huge, complicated institutions, and you know, how on earth do you make those connections and do that communication? Jessica, I noticed your guitar. I wondered whether you used that in any way to help, but how on earth do you get your voice heard? It's such, you know, in such busy and complicated organizations. I don't know, any reflections on that, Jessica?
Yeah, I was going to say, so we've a phrase we've used quite often in the Temple Porter programme is a coalition of the willing. So we've spent a lot of time kind of working in informal networks around the university with people who are doing engaged work and kind of bringing people along that way. It's not ideal though, and I certainly wouldn't claim that the whole of the university knows as much about what's going on at the microcampus as I would like them to. But certainly I've found, we've done internal communications and so on and so forth, but I've found it's time consuming, but going through people has been by far the kind of easiest way of the most effective way of generating further interest in what's going on. People who are put in touch by someone else with me are far more likely to end up doing something than than me putting an email in a notice in an all staff email or whatever.
I would completely agree with that. We had an underspend on our project, so we did actually employ somebody to focus on comms, and I think that has made a difference in terms of getting our voice heard. But really those individual connections are the ones that are most fruitful. But sometimes it's quite difficult, and I think the big top tip I would take away is you need to work a year in advance, because it takes so long to get hold of the right person, muster their enthusiasm, work out how you can work best with them going forwards, and then keep up the conversation to delivery. Sorry, Katrina, go on.
I was just going to say, maybe controversially, I think that for me, I work 3 days a week, and so I have to be in lots of places at once. And I found online working and working remotely has really made a huge difference. I could spend a lot of my time traveling all across the local region by car. Being able to work online has allowed me to sit in multiple meetings that I'm not necessarily personally involved in at the university and wouldn't get an invite to in person, but I can be working and have them on in the background and hear about things that are going on and be seen and be visible and prompt people to talk to me in a way that wouldn't happen face to face because I wouldn't have the capacity. So for me, that has been a bit of a game changer in terms of how I can be in lots of places at the same time.
Yeah, great. Helen, final word.
Oh, not sure I want that. But just a reflection on the kind of, that you asked the question, Paul, about small teams in large institutions. So yeah, Katrina and I are both half-time and have other work that we are doing as well as the Civic University Agreement work. But the public engagement unit, which is the team I head up, has got longevity. So we've been around since 2012, and we are definitely seen as part of the landscape. So there's a bit of visibility there, and sort of respect, dare I say. People understand who we are and what we do and how we work. But also Katrina and mine, that's not quite the right word, but our line manager sits on the university executive board, and so and had that brief of the local and the civic very clearly within their scope. So actually, that sort of how to get buy-in and the visibility across the university was I think is part of that. And also Katrina, before she went on maternity leave and while she was research marketing, head of research marketing, was incredibly well known across the university and had a fantastic reputation for doing great work and working really closely and effectively with the academic community. So yeah, it's the history. I think we haven't come in to do this work. We've got so I think that's a bit, I think it helps to know.
I'm sure. Wonderful. Okay, so yeah, I'm sure everyone would love to join me in a really warm round of applause for.
We've lost him again.
Paul's just been kicked out. So yeah,
President, it does this to me. It hates me. I know it does. But yeah.
Oh. Okay. Shall we say thanks? I'm going to say thank you to everyone for coming along as well. It's been really nice to come and share our work. The opportunity to reflect is really helpful, and I've loved the questions and things, and I've loved hearing about the other projects as well. So yeah, Paul, you're back. I shall let you wrap us up.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, I think Shireen's just put up a poll, so please do, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of feedback. I think the chat makes it really clear how much people have valued everyone's presentation, so thank you for those. I just wanted to flag a couple of things. One is that we're going to have several more of these showcase. We're calling them showcase. It sounds a bit like a bit grand, but sharing practice and sharing the work in progress. So the next one is scheduled for the 3rd of November. If you've got work you'd love to share with the network, please get in touch with Shireen and let us know. You know, there's so much to talk about, isn't there? I mean, two things that I've really thought would be really useful to drill down and focus on in the future. One of them is around the kind of business case and the funding and the kind of nuts and bolts of getting the resource lined up. I thought also that final conversation about just communication. How do we talk about this? How do we frame it? How do we get internal and external communications working? You know, the language we used, etc., would be really interesting. You know, so just two things that I feel really inspired to think about a bit more with your help. And our members area on the website, Adam and the team have been working really hard to just refresh that. There's lots of resources from previous webinars, and we will put this one together as a concrete legacy of today's really lovely conversation. So please do explore that members area if you haven't been there for a while, or go and take a look. And please stay in touch, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. So thank you everybody, and have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye.